Hi everyone, I hope you've been well and you've been reading some good things. I've had quite a busy reading month over August because, it's Booker season, so I read 4 of the different long-listed Booker Prize books, but then I also reread Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale in preparation for the Testaments being published in a few weeks. And I think I've come up with some shortlist predictions for the Booker Prize, which I'll talk about in a minute. I I try not to be one of those bearded people who always reaches up and starts stroking his beard, but it's very tempting to do sometimes. So yeah, I've been reading those things, which has been great. But then also it's been Women in Translation Week. This past week, but also Women in Translation Month. Why not just make it Women in Translation Year, and we can just read all year long? But I really should do. So yeah, I've been reading some books for that as well, and then I've read a couple of novels which have nothing to do with prizes or reading challenges or anything like that, just because I felt like reading them. So yeah, I'll talk about all those. I think I'll begin talking about Bernadine Evaristo's novel Girl, Woman, Other, longlisted for the Booker Prize. And I'm so glad the prize has pushed me to read this book, because it was one when it first came out a few months ago. I'd been wanting to get to it and just hadn't got around to it because it is a fairly long book. And also I was slightly unsure about the structure because it's about so many different characters, and it's really interesting how it's structured. So it's basically a group of short stories about 12 different women, and it sort of groups them together, so you get a perspective of a daughter and then a perspective of a mother or an adult woman, and then the perspective of another woman who is a friend of those two or related to them in some way. And so you get these sort of groupings, and but all the characters, some of them are loosely connected to each other and their stories overlap, and some of them aren't really related to each other at all. And so that sounds all quite disparate. But I think one of my favorite writing genres, if you can call it a genre of novel, is interconnected short stories, books of interconnected short stories. And I made a video about this earlier this year, about how much I like this genre and why I like it so much, because I think it's so interesting how it's sort of like a jigsaw puzzle where you have to piece together their stories, how they might overlap with each other, and when characters recur, like how they recur in each other's stories. And it's so interesting how you see their different perspectives refracted through each other. And so, you get a story very much from one character's perspective, but then you get another story where they appear as another character, and they might have a very different point of view of them. So now all of these 12 characters, most of them are Black and British, many of them are queer as well, and I can already see that a lot of critics will be like, oh, well, this is a novel which is all about identity politics and is exploring it in too self-conscious a way. And yeah, it is about identity politics, because a lot of the characters are self-consciously wrestling with ideas of well, am I a feminist? Am I queer? Am I lesbian? And how they fit in the world. But what I think is so clever about this novel, and I'm going to try to explain this, see if I can express myself of why I think it's how it handles this in such an interesting way, because a lot of these women grew up in periods when there was an increased consciousness about feminism or queer rights or gender identity, and so there's this sort of larger dialogue going on in society, and these women, as it describes their individual lives, talks about how they're trying to figure out themselves how they fit in with these different identities, and also the sort of limitations of identities, because there's this issue with identity labels that if you label yourself as a certain thing, there can be almost heightened self-consciousness about it, where that comes to define everything about you, and these women experience that as they're self-consciously having these dialogues, with themselves, with each other in the novel, with the other characters, but also with the larger community, and how these identity labels can be empowering, yes, because if you feel slightly marginalized about who you are, it can be very empowering to say, well, yes, this is who I am, and proudly own that. But then also it can come to wholly define everything about you, and I think the author really shows how there can be those pitfalls as well as those positive points as well of sort of owning these labels. So yeah, it is sort of all self-consciously about identity politics, but also just about really fascinating storytelling. I mean, I was so enthralled in a lot of these different women's stories because they're really interesting. They raise a lot of other like big social issues to do with domestic violence, to do with economic disparity, and a whole range of issues. And I got really wrapped up in some of their stories. So one of the pitfalls of this style of storytelling, where it's mainly just short stories rather than a whole novel focusing on one or two or three characters, is that you don't get to spend as much time with some of the characters that you personally like as you would, ideally like to. Like there was a few of the characters, like there's a city worker named Carol who I thought was really fascinating, and another character named Dominique who goes to America to join a women's community, an all-women's community for a while, and has a really fascinating storyline. But their story sort of cut off because then it goes on to the story of another woman, and so you'll see them glancingly in other people's stories, but never wholly go back to their own story. So yeah, that is a slight pitfall of the novel, and what I'm sure a lot of readers will find frustrating about it. But I just loved seeing how they all connected with each other, and there is no sort of central narrative to the story, one driving story. It's about really different individual lives. I mean, one of the characters named Alma is a playwright, and she's staging a production of a play that reinvents the lives of Black African female warriors from the distant past. And it sort of centers around a production of this new play and how there's a party celebrating the launch of this play, which becomes very successful. And many of the characters converge within this party, and so towards the end you can sort of see them intermingling with each other, and it's really fascinating and moving and touching how it does that. So yeah, I thought it was a wonderful novel, and one I'd really like to reread because there are so many characters, and I think I would see a lot of the overlaps more reading it a second time as well. So then another novel I read was Elif Shafak's new novel, 10 Minutes and 38 Seconds in This Strange World, which is all about a central character named Layla. And the first part of the novel describes her gradual death because she's been murdered and left in a dumpster basically in Istanbul, and because it's scientists speculate that after we technically die, after our heart stops, our brain remains active for a certain amount of time, and so it stays. It sort of shows her thoughts during that process as she's slowly. Her consciousness is being extinguished, basically, and so I was sort of nervous about approaching this novel and reading this novel. That's very depressing subject matter, but really interestingly, it just tells the story of her life, and so it doesn't come across at least to me, it didn't come across in a really like stridently depressing way, even though there's a lot of difficult subject matter. There's issues to do with child abuse and difficulty with her family. But it's really interesting how it shows the development of her life and her really coming into her own as a person and owning who she wants to be outside of her difficult past. And one issue I partway through the novel, I wasn't sure if I really liked this novel so much because, again, it sort of felt like it was almost too self-consciously dealing with these like sort of social issues, because Layla has a number of friends in her life, and it describes her connection with these different people. And when a new friend is introduced, it goes a bit into that friend's backstory, and it almost seems like she too self-consciously picks people from very different social groups. So there's one person who's a migrant, and another person who has a disability, another person who is transgendered, and it almost felt like she was sort of trying to pack in all these different. That it was almost tokenism of these different social issues, but I don't think it was really, because their stories all come together in the second part of the novel when the friends all converge to memorialize Layla's life. And it does that in a really powerful way, in a way I thought was very moving, and which did sort of take the story beyond, just of trying to self-consciously talk about all these social and political issues. So yeah, I found it really moving in the end, and was an excellent novel. So then I also read Jeanette Winterson's new novel, Frankissstein, and this novel has a fascinating structure. So half of it is told in a sort of historical fiction way of the life of Mary Shelley as she's writing Frankissstein, and then going beyond and showing further into her life. And but then it also has a present day section about a mad scientist who's trying to find a way to capture human consciousness and put that into a computer, and is doing some quite wild experiments. And this scientist's relationship with a doctor who is non-binary, and it shows their romantic relationship in a really interesting and compelling way. But then also just this whole mad storyline of this future set time where it's at a convention where another character is a businessman that has a whole range of mechanized sex dolls that he's peddling, and it's really interesting how this character is he's very bombastic and has these long-winded speeches when he sounds really ridiculous, but also he comes across eventually as quite a dynamic character. I think it's really interesting how Winterson builds his character as something much more. I think she could have easily just portrayed him as kind of a joke, but I think she does sort of take him seriously and his ideas and viewpoints seriously, and he starts to have a relationship with a Christian woman later on in the novel, so the novel goes back and forth between these two very different narrative accounts. I mean, I always think of Winterson as a very experimental novelist who is really playing with language, and there is a lot of language play in this, but the historical sections of the novel dealing with Mary Shelley's life are written in a much more straightforward narrative style, and it shows that she can really do that kind of narrative style really, really well, because I was really gripped by those sections. And then it's interesting how it flips back and forth between these two different narratives, but then shows an overlap of these ideas about consciousness and machines and what is the essence of our humanity. But overall, it's just a really, really enjoyable novel, so playful and fun, and yeah, I hugely enjoyed it. And of course, I also read Lucy Ellmann's mammoth novel Ducks Newburyport, which took me about almost 2 weeks of solid reading time. But then, like I said, I was, as in my strategy for reading this novel, I was listening to the audiobooks of Girl, Woman, Other in between reading sections of this. And so, yeah, I made a whole video talking a lot about this novel and how much I loved it, and how I was surprised how drawn into the narrative I was. I mean, every time I went back to this novel, it felt like a pleasure. It wasn't like a chore. With the risk of a big, huge book like this, it's just going to feel like a chore all the time. And of course, there were some sections where I felt like, oh gosh, there's going to be no end to this novel. It's just going on and on. But mostly, I was just so entertained, and because it's really, really funny in a lot of sections. I don't know if I emphasized that enough in the video review I made of this novel, but it's so funny that I was laughing a lot of the time. There's a lot of funny wordplay, but also jokes and references to films when a film line will come up. There's a whole section of how her husband says, "Don't call me Shirley," and so she repeats this sort of joke, because this is a joke from the film Airplane. And if you've never seen the film Airplane, then you won't get that joke. And she's never seen that film, so she doesn't get that joke either. But it's something that she repeats, and it almost makes it more funny that she doesn't understand that joke. That she still repeats this line, even though she doesn't, get the humor or the basis of the humor behind it. And so yeah, it's so great. And I can't praise it enough. I will be shocked if it is not shortlisted for the prize. Obviously, I haven't read the Testaments because nobody's been given a copy of there's no advanced copies of the Testaments because it's strictly under embargo. But I did reread The Handmaid's Tale in preparation for that, because I've been told the Testaments is very much a sequel to this. And so you really need to be up on the details of The Handmaid's Tale in order to get the Testaments and the story of the Testaments. I don't know how much good it'll do to just read it independently without knowing the story of The Handmaid's Tale. I mean, probably you could get by if you've just seen the TV series, because I think the first series of the TV series pretty closely follows, this novel. But anyway, I reread the novel, and I'm so glad I did, because I read this so long ago. I mean, I still know the story of it, and I knew what was going to happen, but I still found it really tense in sections, and the way she builds the psychological tension of the main character, of how she, the massive pressure she feels living in this environment filled with fear, that I just found it so effective and moving. And I was reminded too, it's been quite a while since I read much of Margaret Atwood's writing. A lot of her writing I found really beautiful too, like her use of metaphor, the way that she describes her psychological state, being stuck in this, and her ambiguity, the real ambiguous feelings she feels about whether she should just comply and go with the system or rebel against it. And I really enjoyed the complexity of that, and reading it again found it very moving. But then, of course, since I'm conscious the sequel is coming, I was trying to pick out details of how the story might continue after this, because all we know about the Testaments is that it takes place 15 years after Offred's final scene in the novel, when Offred leaves, and we don't know what becomes of her. And so I sort of wonder how much more we'll find out about her story, if anything. I mean, we might not know anything else about her character, but we know that the Testaments is going to be narrated from 3 different women's point of view, who are from Gilead, and so who are in it. But I start to wonder too, because of the imagery of the Testaments is of a woman in a green smock, and if you remember, the people in green smocks in this novel are the Marthas, who are older women who are domestic servants and aren't able to bear children. So I wonder if one or all of the points of view that we're going to get in the Testaments are from a Martha's point of view. I think I had a very different perspective reading this novel than I did the first go around, because I'm just naturally more aware of a lot of social issues and things to do with feminism, and which I was conscious of before, but I think even more so now. I try to always be aware of how limited my point of view is as a reader, that I read as a man, and it's why I like talking about books with Anna James so much, because I think she gives a point of view that I wouldn't think of all of the time, and so I was particularly more aware of the fateful story of Offred's very good friend, who she meets up with again in an unexpected context in the novel, and the tragedy of that situation. That really got to me and really struck me this go reading around. So yeah, it's safe to say that I am very excited to read the Testaments now after rereading this. So if I was going to speculate about what is going to be on the shortlist for the Booker Prize, which is going to be announced on Tuesday. I think the 6 novels that I pick, would definitely be Duck's Newburyport. I will be shocked if this novel isn't on there, but also Valeria Luiselli's novel Lost Children Archive, which I read earlier this year when it was longlisted for the Women's Prize and was so moved by it. It's, I think, a really incredible novel. But then also Girl, Woman, Other, I think really has a great chance of being on the shortlist, and I hope it does, because, yeah, like I said, I found this novel so moving. But then also Elif Shafak's novel, 10 minutes, 38 seconds in This Strange World, I hope will make the shortlist as well. I'm not sure if the Testaments will be on. I mean, it'll be interesting since it still won't have been published when the shortlist is announced. But yeah, I don't think it'll make it on. I do really hope that Frankissstein makes the shortlist as well, because it's such an enjoyable novel that I think I think a lot of people really enjoy reading this. And then I have a sort of inkling that maybe Salman Rushdie's novel Quixote will be on the list as well, though I haven't read it yet. And I should say that I've only read 9 of the long-listed novels for the Booker Prize, so there's 4 I still haven't read, and this is one of them, but I have a feeling that maybe this might make it. Whether it makes it or not, I'm still very eager and excited to read it now. And really interestingly, I've been listening to a podcast about the publication of the Satanic Verses, and I was aware before that Rushdie had a fatwa placed upon him, but I didn't understand the full circumstances around that whole situation. And there's a 10-part podcast that the BBC put out recently. I'll put a link to it in the description below if you want to have a listen. It's so fascinating and really tense and interesting hearing about the whole context around that. It's much more complicated than I thought it was, the whole circumstances around it, because it goes a lot about the Muslim population in Britain was perceived at the period of time when the Satanic Verses was published, and how the just widespread controversy it caused in the community, but also the massive difficulties and dangers it imposed, not just to Rushdie himself, but to everyone surrounding the publication of the novel. Like, I didn't realize that 2 of Rushdie's translators, I think his Italian and his Japanese translator of the Satanic Verses, were attacked and stabbed multiple times, as well as there being the threat to Rushdie himself, and which still remains, that there's the threat of the fatwa on him. So yeah, it was it's a 10-part series, but each episode is quite short, so I'd really recommend going and having a listen to that. And I've never read the Satanic Verses, but I would really want to read that as well now, as well as reading this new novel. But anyway, those are the 6 books that I think will be shortlisted, but we'll see on Tuesday what the result is. Now, I also read this month Colson Whitehead's new novel, The Nickel Boys, because I'd heard such amazing things about it, and I loved his novel, The Underground Railroad, so much. And yeah, this novel it's a shorter novel, but it is incredible, really well done. So it's all about a central character of a boy who is growing up in the 60s, and he's about to go to university when something very unexpected happens, and there's a very bad mix-up, and he's incarcerated and taken to a juvenile detention center, which is meant to sort of educate him and rehabilitate him for society. But the actual circumstances of that juvenile facility is more like a hard prison where all the prisoners, these young men, are kept as slave labor, basically, and how the different ways that they're being abused and killed by the officers and the wardens of the prison, and really like a lot of companies that sell things to the prison and then which are sold on for a profit to the local community. So it shows how the local community is sort of involved in this as well, and it's so moving and really well done, and all the more striking and horrible, really, because it is based on a real circumstance of a real prison, and where many years after, or actually, no, not too many years after this prison was shut down, they discovered all these bodies which were buried around the prison of prisoners that had been killed by officers, and hadn't been reported, that these boys just sort of disappeared, and nobody came to claim them, and yeah, so incredibly moving novel. And like I've said in other recent videos, I really want to read more of Colson Whitehead's back catalogue, because there are several novels of his which I just wasn't aware of before, so I'm eager to read more now. And then, like I said, it's Women in Translation week recently, and month, and so at the beginning of the month I'd read this new novella called The Collection by Nina Legere, and was translated from the French, and this novel is it's all about dick, really. It's about a woman who has anonymous sexual encounters in different hotel rooms with different anonymous men, and she's talking about how she's creating this like menagerie in her mind of penises, that she likes looking at penises of different anonymous men and then just remembering them, and this is just a sort of kink of hers that she has, and so it portrays that in a really graphic way of these encounters that she has and descriptions of these men. But surprisingly, I found this novel very moving in the way it portrays this, because it's so interesting how I think there's a lot of layers to it, where on one Goodreads review I saw that just dismissed it as cock-filled nonsense, and there is a lot of cock in it, but it's so much about our desires and the way that in society we're made to feel like we need to compartmentalize our desires and our sexual practices apart from our social and public life, and she shows that in a really interesting way, because we never really find anything out about the central character at all, and she almost she does explicitly make fun of the fact that we don't know anything about her. It sort of speculates, well, she could be a discontent housewife, she could be a nymphomaniac, she could be somebody with a history of sexual abuse, and this is how she's dealing with it, but it never tells you what her past or present is really all about, other than these encounters that she has. And it also shows the complexity of desire, how when she engages with all these different sexual acts, how there are consequences to that too, how it's not, it is about pleasure, definitely, but but that also becomes confused as she is trying to understand what she really wants to desire, and it's also really interesting how it shows how the many different men she encounters, their perspective on her and their very different interpretations about her, and so you become very aware about how they're projecting all these things upon her. So some of them are very aggressive towards her. Some of them are just acting out certain fantasies. Some of them are very grateful to her for showing them sexual attention, and find this just a really liberating experience amidst their everyday life. And so yeah, I think this is a novel that has many layers to it, and I was sort of surprised how I connected with it so much and found it so fascinating, because quite a lot of the time when books that are self-consciously about ideas withhold information about their characters, I find that very frustrating, because I feel like I can't develop any emotional attachment to it, but I feel like the aspects of her life that were suppressed, it made it almost more emotional for me than if she had divulged everything about her character and who she was. So I think it's an incredible novel, and I would really recommend it, but I know that it's definitely not going to be a novel for everyone. And then another short novel I read, or novella, it's explicitly defined as a novella within the book, is Nicola Barker's new novella, I Am Sovereign. And this novella is just bonkers. It's so it's basically about the central character Charles, he's selling his house, and there's an estate agent there, and they're presenting the house over a 20-minute period to a woman who's Chinese and her daughter, and the mother, she doesn't speak English, so her daughter is there to translate. And yeah, it's just so wacky how she goes about portraying this story. It's a very self-conscious story where later in the novel, the author Nicola Barker actually intrudes upon the narrative and is speaking directly to the reader and speaking about the construction of this novel. And so it goes into their individual stories, but and about how a lot of them sort of follow, like Charles follows a sort of self-help guru, and the estate agent and the Chinese daughter, they both follow this YouTube creator who they watch compulsively and take advice from. And so I think it is sort of almost this search for a kind of religious experience in a way that is atheist, looking to these different sources for inspiration and help and guidance in their life. But then also it's just about the novel making process in general, because she self-consciously talks about how this is a novella and there's only a certain amount of pages, and so she needs to stop writing this novella soon. But then she also starts arguing with, there's an African character who's introduced, and but then that character sort of rebels against the author, and there's disagreements about the details of this character's life, and and she even refers back to her previous novel, Happy, which won the Goldsmith Prize and was longlisted for the Women's Prize, and so she talks about this novel within this novella and refers back to it, and how she, after writing this novel, she was really questioning whether the novel writing experience itself and whether she can express everything she wants to within the novel form, and so yeah, it's a very self-conscious novella, and I just really enjoyed it. I think she's a really fascinating writer, but I know this will be a very dissatisfying novel for people who are looking for more of a plot and traditional character arc. I felt like I couldn't really emotionally connect with any of these characters because she writes about them so self-consciously, and so yeah, it's is a fascinating experience. But I think it's going to be one of those books which over time I'm just not going to remember much about it in general. But who knows? Maybe it will have more subconscious effects which I'm not even really aware of. So those are all the books that I read this month, and I am still reading for Women in Translation Week, like I talked about in my TBR video. I am reading The Eighth Life. I went in from reading Ducks Newburyport, one big massive novel, to another, I think it's 940 pages long, and it's a family epic about generations of a family in the country of Georgia, and it is sprawling and epic, and it's really getting into the characters' lives, and I'm starting to really enjoy it. I'm only about 100 pages in, but yeah, I'm quite gripped by it, and so yeah, I'm gonna really enjoy this long journey. But it's also making me hungry. One of the things about this family is that there's this secret family recipe for making a hot chocolate, which is just described as sublime and completely overwhelming, and so it's making me really want hot chocolate, in the same way that in Ducks Newburyport I got really into baking and wanted to make cinnamon rolls for the first time. So yeah, both of these big long novels are really making me hungry. But yeah, has that ever happened with you recently with a book you've read where there's such an amazing description of food that it just makes you want to go out and consume that food right away? Yeah. Let me know in the comments below. But also let me know what else you've been reading this month. If you've read any of these books, any of your reactions to them, do you have any predictions for the shortlist for the Booker Prize? Let me know, because I'm going to be gripped on Tuesday to find out the details. I think it's going to be announced late morning or mid-morning in UK time. So yeah, let me know all that in the comments below, and let's have a good discussion. But hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye, everyone.